What's up, YouTube? Lysergic here, and welcome to the one, the only
Ultimate Gaming PC Build Vlog 2015.
I'll be taking my gaming computer as it stands today and swapping it into the new Fractal design Arc XL case that I just got. I'll also be switching out the motherboard for an Asus Maximus 7 Hero, and I'm going to be installing the OS on two Intel 730 series 480GB SSDs. My friend Eric was nice enough to lend us his GoPro HD Hero 4, which we're going to be using for some sexy time-lapse footage of the build. But if you just want to skip to the juicy parts, I'll have the timestamps for all that right after the intro. Alright guys, now before we get started, the first thing everyone should know is that before you do any PC build, you should have an anti-static strap firmly attached to something that's going to ground you, not the air, and that you should have a static-free workspace, preferably a build mat, and definitely not preferably a carpet. Do as I say, not as I do. The purpose of this build, like I stated in the intro, is full throttle, no holds barred, no compromises, ultimate gaming PC performance. That's why I chose the Intel 730 series SSDs. They're basically the best you can get, and I don't like Samsung, so I try to stay away from them. I chose an Asus Maximus 7 Hero motherboard because it has a lot of enthusiast overclocking features, and I chose the Fractal Design Arc XL because, I mean, Jesus, man, look at that thing. It's a behemoth. But surprisingly enough, it's going to take up a little bit more space than the very blurry in the distance Cooler Master Half XB Evo. That thing is very square and it takes up a shit ton of space on my desk. So I'm hoping to get a little bit more space with the Arc XL. Even though it is really big, it's just a lot more tall than it is wide, as opposed to the case I have now. So other components we're going to be using are the two 980s that I already have. Those are EVGA superclocked 980s, and those are about $550 each. The Intel 730 series SSDs, I got those for about $200 each because they were on sale, and the motherboard I got for about $200 as well. I'm going to be using an EVGA 1000 watt G power supply. That was, I believe, about $150. And then I have two WD 1TB black hard drives that I'm going to be putting in the build also. Now, obviously, I use this build for content creation, recording videos, DxTory, editing videos, Sony Vegas, stuff like that. And I'm hopefully going to have a separate rig for Sony Vegas eventually so that I don't have to wait while I'm rendering my videos. I can continue recording. But right now, this is going to have to be a do-it-all kind of jack-of-all-trades rig. And I'm pretty much okay with that. I enjoy having, you know, the most badass computer with the most badass single computer that I can fit on my desk. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get this rig off my desk. I'm going to take it apart, get all the components separated so I can assemble them inside the new computer and put them in the new case. But before I do that, real quick, I'm going to take a couple before benchmarks so I can compare the after results and show you guys a nice before and after, you know, see if the new case and the new fans and the motherboard actually make any difference. So just to highlight the tools that you're going to want before you take your old computer off the desk and begin to disassemble it or start to build your new computer, you want to make sure that you have a cat or two, some nicotine, some canned air, a screwdriver. You want to have both kinds of screwdrivers, actually, a regular bit and a Phillips bit. You need some sort of installation media. If you're going to be using Windows 7 or Windows 8, you could install it on a flash drive. And you're also going to want some pliers, maybe to help get your backplate screws or bolts down. And, of course, you need some thermal paste. I picked Arctic MX4. Alright, boys, this is it. Moment of truth here. This is going to be the last time that I see my PC as it is. Just going to reach over here and shut her down via the OS shutdown button. And let's hope the next time we turn this monitor on is working properly. Of course. Doesn't even shut down right. The reason that I wanted to reinstall Windows so bad in the first place, which is what started this whole journey here, is because the first time I built my PC, when I originally put this together, it was transferred from an old HP PC, and I changed the motherboard, but I kept the hard drive, and I put in a new graphics card and a new CPU, so basically everything was different except for the hard drive. That was the only piece that I kept, and the RAM. And the problem with that was that when you change your motherboard and change your CPU, not necessarily when you change your CPU, but when you change your motherboard, you generally want to reinstall Windows. And I still haven't done that to this day. So it's kind of like a weird situation. but I get a lot of stupid errors that I shouldn't have to be dealing with, and just weird stuff happens because I never actually reinstalled Windows in the first place. So there it goes, she's off. Next time we boot this baby up, Windows will be reinstalled. I'll still have all my old hard drives, but I'll be adding another one, and we'll be in the new case. So let's get this baby unplugged and take her apart. I'm going to miss this case. It was really good. I mean, honestly, it's more of like a test bench per se than a permanent case. I wouldn't quite call it. Look how I put that SSD in there. It's just chilling. We're going to be reusing that. But honestly, it's more of a test bench than a permanent case. As you can see, it's got like an over-under motherboard on top, fans on top, drives and devices and power supply on the bottom kind of form factor. And the problem with that, I mean, it's really easy to put together. Super easy case to build in. I'm glad I used this case to do my first like full build. I really am. The only problem with it is that it's really, really hard, as you can see, to like properly cable manage in this case, because especially with the H100i, you have, you know, things coming up from the front and your tubes going over the top. It's just really, really hard to cable manage this thing in the way it is. It's kind of tough. I mean, you could do it if you were committed to it, but I never got around to it. As you can see, this thing is just a complete mess as far as cable management goes. We're going to take care of that pretty soon. So now that we've got all the panels off, the first thing we're going to want to do is pull out these graphics cards, because EVGA 980s are not cheap, and we don't want them in the way of all the destruction we're going to do. So let's take the SLI bridge off, and we'll get these graphics cards out.
What's up, guys? This is Lysergic from the future. I've come back in time to tell you that I'm going to be narrating all the time-lapse video parts so they're not as boring to watch. And also, I've come back in time to tell you that GTX 980s are friggin' awesome.
Okay, while I was at it taking the graphics cards out, I unplugged the power connectors, and I also popped the front panel off, as you can see there. Now we have the front panel off so we can access the front fans, unscrew them, and then we can get to unscrewing the radiator, get the whole cooler assembly off. We're going to take out this DVD drive. We can pop out the hard drives while we're at it. These are quick swap hard drive bays, so they're super easy to remove. Makes your life a lot easier. So we'll take those out and get them out of the way for now. And now we're going to move on to getting the cooler out of the way. So once we get that radiator and the cooling unit off, I can start getting the rest of the connectors off the motherboard and get the whole thing disassembled.
Hey guys, Future Lysergic here again. My thoughts on this one are that the H100i is an awesome part, and it's really all I need for all-in-one cooling and CPU cooling in general. Of course, I'd rather have, you know, a custom loop, and the Corsair Link software kind of sucks. It's really hard to use and sometimes doesn't detect your parts. But overall, my experience with the H100i has been that it's a really nice piece of hardware.
And just like that, we have the H100i removed. You want to make sure you scrape off any excess thermal paste on the bottom. You want to get that out of the way and reapply it properly when you install it again. That's very important. Take your RAM out, save that for later because I'm going to reuse it. Alright guys, with this case, now that I have most of the components out of the way, I'm going to start unscrewing the motherboard standoffs. I'm going to get the motherboard out of the way. Then I'm going to disconnect the power supply so that I can get inside the rest of the case and get all the hard drives and all the rest of that stuff down out of there so we can start putting things together. This is going much quicker than I actually originally imagined, so hopefully things will keep going well. When you unscrew your motherboard standoffs, you want to make sure, be very, very careful not to scratch your motherboard. If you scratch your motherboard even the slightest bit, you can ruin the whole thing, and then you have to deal with an RMA, and nobody wants to do that. That's just no fun all around.
For this time lapse, I will be playing Captain Hindsight because I'm gonna have to end up frickin' RMAing a part after I built the whole computer. Turns out one of the Noctua fans I purchased is super loud, actually louder than the other two that are attached to my radiator combined, and it has terrible PWM control. It's got fluctuations in speed. It's all broken. So I'm gonna have to RMA that one and get a new one.
Okay, so that's gonna be that. We got our motherboard out. I'm gonna take the CPU out. Clean that bad boy up. Use some isopropyl alcohol. That's the first thing you want to do to get your thermal paste off your CPU, is use isopropyl alcohol. And we'll store this motherboard for my next build. Make sure you store it in a nice non-static environment, in an anti-static bag if you have one. But generally just keep it safe, you know, don't scratch it, anything stupid like that. You don't want to have to buy a new motherboard. Nobody does. Alrighty, would you look at that? We got ourselves an empty case. All the front panels and side panels and top panels and all the panels are still off. But you know what? I'm going to leave this case as is because the next time I touch it, I'm probably going to be building in it. So I'll just leave all the panels off. I'm going to go store this somewhere safe, and I will show you what we're going to do next. Alright guys, we are officially ready to start building. This is very exciting. So we've got our Asus Maximus 7 Hero motherboard. And very important is when you're putting your motherboard components together, place it on the motherboard box. Your motherboard box is a perfect static, anti-static environment to start assembling your components on. You don't want to introduce static into the mix, especially this early, and fry your motherboard. So the first thing you're going to want to do is install your CPU. You want to take your CPU, which should be nice and clean. After you've hopefully cleaned it with some alcohol and maybe a razor. You want to pop up the dust cover here. Takes a little bit of force. Don't be afraid. And after you pop up that little clip, you're going to pull this baby right here. And that will open up. Now once you got that clip open and your motherboard on a nice, safe, static-free surface, you're ready to install your CPU. Now be careful guys, if you don't remember, in case you forgot, this is probably the most expensive fucking thing in your computer. Don't mess it up. Be very careful, be gentle with it. Now, but once we have that out of the way, you also have to realize that it's just a CPU, especially these newer CPUs that don't have pins on the bottom, where the pin is actually in the motherboard socket. It's pretty hard to mess up if you're just fucking careful. So, excuse my profanity, but just don't be dumb. You could do it. You don't have to be afraid. It's not hard to build a computer, guys. You want to find, you can probably see right there, this little tiny gold triangle. And that little tiny gold triangle will tell you that this is the corner that aligns with the socket. So you're going to find the part of the socket with that little gold triangle. And then you also want to find the part of the socket that aligns up with these two little tiny notches. There's not much you could really miss there. There's notches there, triangle there. So you want to align it very carefully. Here, I'll do it so you guys can see it. You want to align it very carefully, and you don't want to like slide it in. There's no sliding, there's no grinding, there's no pushing it in. You just very carefully drop it in the socket. That's all there is to it. You drop it in, give it a little tap to make sure it's in there properly, and you're lined up. Your CPU is installed. It's that easy. You don't even have to pop the dust cover out. It'll actually do it for you automatically when you push this down. See how that's like there? Then pop, dust cover pops off. And your CPU is installed, guys. It's that easy. Now this is an i7-4790K. This is an LGA 1150 socket. If you can't see it right there, it says right there on the motherboard next to the RAM slots. LGA 1150. The LGA 1150 socket is the second to newest socket, and then the second to most relevant socket right now. Right now everyone's talking about the 2011. The 2011 has a lot bigger of a die. It's a much bigger CPU, and those are the ones that are the fancy Intel hex cores and 8 cores that everyone's using right now. But if you're building a gaming computer, and that's what this build is, it's an ultimate gaming computer. If you're building a gaming computer, you do not need a fancy 8-core Intel CPU with hyper-threading. You don't even need hyper-threading. This CPU is barely better than an i5-4670K, which is a lot cheaper. The 4790K is the most expensive you really want to go to build a gaming computer. It's really not worth it unless you're going to be doing any kind of serious video recording and content creation, rendering video on your CPU. Other than that, it's really not worth it to go any more than the i7-4790K. And at a $330 price point, that's an extremely competitive price point for, a gaming CPU. You could spend a lot more and get a lot less. It gets to a point where you're just on the diminishing return scale, where it's not really worth it to keep going to squeeze out that little tiny extra bit of performance. So next we're going to want to install our DIMM slots. This is fairly straightforward, guys. This motherboard has one-sided clips. Yours might have two-sided clips, so just be aware of that. And you're going to want to install them in the red slots on an Asus motherboard. So those are going to go dual channel, goes in the red slots. If you have quad channel, obviously you'll be using all 4 slots. I shouldn't have to explain that to you. And I probably have it backwards. No, I don't. it can take a little bit of force to get your DIMM to go down. It's really not rocket science. Just give it a nice firm push, and then it'll pop down side by side. You'll feel a very distinct click when you push it in, when you know it's in properly. You'll know when it's in there. Don't use too much force. You shouldn't be trying to break the motherboard. I'll do it again. Ready? Take it out. Not too much force. Just very, very gently. Pop your DIMM slot in. You'll feel it pop down one side at a time. And that's it. Now you have your DIMMs in. You got your RAM and your CPU installed. How easy was that? Now, because I'm using an all-in-one cooler, the H100i that you saw me take off before, which I'm not being very gentle with, I'm going to prep my case first. Now, because I'm using an all-in-one cooler, the H100i that you saw me take off before I even install the motherboard in the first place, I'm going to prep the case by getting this baby in the way, because since you can't disconnect the CPU block, it's kind of annoying to have the radiator kind of hanging around while you're trying to install your motherboard. So I'm going to prep the case by taking the 140mm fan here off the top, and I'm going to be replacing those with the best fan in the universe, the Noctua Industrial PPM, PPC, PP whatever, 3000 PWM fan. These things are complete beasts. Noctua fans have amazing static pressure. They're not the prettiest things in the world, but they're literally the best fans that you can put with your radiator. And these are the 3000 RPM version, so they can go way, way faster, and the best part is they're super silent. I recommend Noctua fans for everything. I don't care what your application is, you can make it better by adding Noctua fans. And no, I wish I was getting paid to say that.
Pretty funny how I talked up those fans and one of them was broken, right? Yeah, it kind of sucks. But anyway, more important than that is that I made a huge mistake in installing the radiator first here. It was easy, and it was nice to have it out of the way. But it was kind of annoying having to move the block, the CPU block around to constantly not be in my way while I was building and make sure it wasn't going to swing down and knock into my motherboard while I had it standing up and all that stuff. But more importantly than that, it was also a huge mistake because the 8-pin power connector for the CPU was goddamn near impossible to install. There was no way I was going to be able to plug it in while it was actually plugged into the power supply itself. So I had to unplug it from there, and then I had to like basically stand on top of the case, and it was really, really tough to thread it between the water tubes on the H100i to actually get it where it was on the motherboard. I probably should have mocked the motherboard up and put it inside the case and then put the radiator on top before I did any of that, so I would have realized how hard it was going to be to get the 8-pin connector in. But it ended up being, you know, not a huge deal. It was just a serious pain in the ass. I did eventually get it in, obviously, but I would definitely advise against doing this, as in installing the radiator before you install your motherboard, unless you know that it's not going to be an issue trying to plug in any of your 8-pin connector, 24-pin connector, all that stuff.
I got a lot of the little annoying things out of the way that I wanted to get done first before I started putting all of my serious hardware in the case to make my life a little easier. So as you can see here, my front radiator is installed, my top radiator that is. I'm not going to have a front radiator quite yet, but I replaced those fans with the Noctua NF-F12s. And once again, man, the NF-F12s, best fans in the world. You won't go wrong with them. So now I have my radiator installed and up out of the way. Those are going to be in a pull position. That's actually exhaust. Most people would tell you that a radiator should be installed with push, you know, or push-pull. But most people do use push. I am using pull and using it as an exhaust. Most people use their radiators on an intake. But that's because that's just the way that this case is designed right now. If you look over here in the front, I have the 140mm fans both installed in the front. So those are going to be the intakes. They're going to take the air inside the case. So you can see there's the 140s, both of them. Count them, 1, 2. Those are going to be the intakes. The air is going to come in the case. Some of it's going to get pushed down by the graphics cards, but most of it is going to be brought in by that intake and all sucked up right through the radiator. Hopefully that'll be keeping my case nice and cool. So sorry if that was a little blurry. It's kind of annoying to hold the camera, but I won't be holding it pretty much the rest of the time. I'll have it nice and set up in a perch where you can see me work. So, next up, basically what we have to do is Prep anything else that needs to go in before the motherboard goes in. Install the standoffs. And installing the standoffs is something that you want to be really careful about. When you actually go to put your motherboard down on the standoffs, you got to be really, really, really careful not to scratch the bottom of your motherboard, or you will end up RMAing it, and that does not sound like fun to me. I don't know about you guys. So everything else is pretty much prepped. I'm going to get those motherboard standoffs in, and I will catch up with you guys. Is there fucking plastic on the back of this? Oh, that's so weird. Well, if you don't install this baby first, you are going to be very, very screwed. And there it is. Put it this way. You'll have to take your whole motherboard out to put this thing in, if you forget. I'm just going to stress it one more time, the importance of not scratching your motherboard. I'm going to say it like 20 more times, but do not scratch your motherboard when you're installing it. Those standoffs are metal, they're sharp, and your motherboard has very, very, very shallow contacts and copper runs in the bottom of it, so that's definitely not something that you want to have be a problem while you're building your computer. I can guarantee you that. In fact, I bet you $100 that you would not enjoy the experience of RMAing your motherboard. This is the part where if you don't know what you're doing, you read the goddamn manual. Your motherboard probably comes with a hefty manual, especially if it's a nice motherboard like an Asus one. Look how big that manual is. They have everything in this manual. Read it. Once you get this part done, then you're pretty much in the clear. You can get to the fun part, as long as you don't kill anybody when you do this part. We are ready to install the motherboard. So you're going to want to take it in whatever orientation the standoffs are. You want to make sure you have your anti-static strap on for this part, because this can be very, very, very dangerous to fuck up. Don't put the motherboard down onto the standoffs until you know they're all lined up, because you don't want to scratch anything. Get it all nice and lined up, fit it into the I/O shield, and just make sure not to scratch. Alright, we are very, very close. And there it is. She's in. Check the I/O shield is being installed properly. You want to make sure that you're getting through that I/O shield and everything's all nice and lined up. Once you've got her in there and it's all lined up with the I/O shield, you can just screw everything in. This is computer building PSA number 413. Whatever you do, please don't build your computer on a carpet like me. It's going to be so much more trouble than it is convenience of having your computer close to your desk. Trust me, you'd rather carry it down the stairs and build it in the kitchen. And with that, you're ready to paste up your CPU. You want to be very careful not to apply too much. You want to go with the line method. I tend to use the line method. A lot of people use the P method, but I like the line method. For 1150 CPUs, you do not need a big line. A little tiny line is more than enough. And this is non-conductive thermal paste. If you have conductive thermal paste, you have to be extra careful not to get it anywhere else on your CPU than, you know, the die on top. And get ready to install your cooler. As soon as you line it up, go straight down. A really convenient thing about installing an SSD is that they have 0 moving parts. That means that you don't have to worry about putting it in a drive bay rack. You don't have to worry about anti-vibration mounts. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff because it doesn't make any noise and it won't break if you leave it hanging by the cord. I literally sometimes leave an SSD just hanging by the cord when I build in a computer because there's nothing you can break. It's not, you know, unless it actually disconnects from hanging by the cord, nothing's going to go wrong. You're not going to have any problems with it.
but in this case I bolted them to the little tiny mounts on the back of the motherboard tray, which I think is a really nice feature to include in the case. They're not anywhere else in the way, especially if you're doing a water cooling loop. The cables and the whole SSD, it's all out of the way.
Alright, so this was a big jump, but I just wanted to get a lot of things wired up. Now we have pretty much everything that is not related to the power supply all wired in. We got our front panel connectors all wired up. 2 USB headers are taken up by the pump and the front USB header. We got our DIMMs in. We got 2 hard drive cages in. I put the hard drive cages in 5.25 inch bay adapters because I figured that would be a little easier when it comes to eventually doing the custom loop. Now I have all this space up in the front for the radiator. So now all there is left to do is plug in these 2 SATA cables real quick. I only have 3 straight ones, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to use an angled one somewhere. I was hoping to not do that because this isn't really a good application for right angle SATA connectors. But if I just use this one up here, it should be fine. But other than that, everything else besides the power supply is pretty much done. The only thing really there is left to do is to get the power supply wired up and plug that into everything, and then put our VGA cards in. Once we have the 2 980s in and the power supply wired up, we will be ready to post. Actually, we could probably post the system before we put the 980s in. I think I'm going to do that because that way if I do have to change anything, I don't have to move them, take them out, or anything like that. So let's get these SATA connectors hooked up and do a little bit of cable management in the back. And when we come back, we will be posting the system for the first time. Very exciting.
The EVGA 1000 watt G power supply is an excellent power supply, and it's really served me well so far. If you look at Johnny Guru's review, he gives it a sparkling review, and Johnny Guru does not go easy on any power supplies. He doesn't make any exceptions. It's a little bit overkill for a build with 2 980s in it since they're so efficient. You could probably get away with a 750 watt power supply, or maybe even something a little less. But prior to this build, I had 2 780s in my case, and they are definitely a lot more power hungry, so that's why I went with this power supply in the first place.
Okay, let me tilt this back to get her in the light. We have everything hooked up. This is going to be a very shaky clip here because I'm holding the camera, but I was going to post it without the graphics cards, but I have everything else plugged in, and if I don't figure out how I'm going to get the graphics cards in there, there's no way I'm going to be able to wire them. Is it pretty? Absolutely not. Definitely not pretty yet, but we're getting there. So, we're going to put it up on the desk, get the graphics cards in there real quick, and we'll be right back to post. Alright, here it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's up on the desk. It certainly ain't pretty. I'm going to have to do a little bit of cable managing. But I have all the hard drives disconnected except the one that I want to use. Fans are in the front. Everything's plugged in. And here it is. Let's see if she boots up. Ready? Oh, almost forgot. I don't have the power cable plugged in. Hold on. There it is. Lights are on. We have lights. Do we have ignition? Oh, we have ignition. Oh yeah, it's posting, baby. Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's posted. We have liftoff. Sorry for the shaky camera. I just couldn't figure out a good way to, get this to sit on the thing. But that's it. It's on. Everything's on. Lights are on. System's posting. That's how you build a computer the wrong way, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, don't do it like this. Please don't, do your computer on a carpet unless you know what you're doing. Do it on like your counter with a safe anti-static mat or something like that. This was like the most terrible way to do it, and I did have a lot of problems because I did do it this way, sitting on the ground. So once again, do as I say, not as I do. Now that we are posted, I'm going to install Windows via a boot USB. Also, a good way to do it is through, just plug in a disk drive just for the time being, because sometimes getting your system to boot from USB is a pain in the ass. So I'm gonna install Windows, and then I'm gonna use ninite.com to install all the little software that I need to start off. I'm gonna have a couple hours of work ahead of me of just getting everything, all my software and programs installed. And once I have Vegas in there and DxTory and all that stuff, I will run my benchmark suite again, and we will see the after results of the benchmarks. So I'll join you guys in a minute once I have that all installed. Once again, if you are doing this, Ninite.com has all the software you need. You know, it has a whole bunch of really good shit. You know, just like a whole list of software that is just really good stuff to you know, have when you're booting up to a fresh install of Windows. So I'm going to get Windows installed and I'll catch back up with you guys in a minute. So here we are installing Windows. You're going to pick English, United States. If those don't apply to you, you're watching the wrong video because I don't know any other languages than English. And click install now, and it should bring you right through the whole process. You're going to want to do this with plain boot drive installed. It's going to ask you for your product key, which I'm going to find through my email right now. I'm doing this with a fresh Intel 730 series SSD to install it on. I actually just tried to plug all of the hard drives in and see if I could do it that way with all the hard drives plugged in, but it would still boot from the USB to install it on this SSD. And get this, even with no drivers installed and a fresh motherboard, it booted to Windows on my old hard drive. It magically, with a brand new motherboard, it somehow booted to Windows. This thing does not want me to reinstall. This really was the strangest thing. I was so confused. It really was strange. Okay, so here's my product key. Oh god, that's a long product key. HYH88. You thought I was that dumb, didn't you? That I was going to tell you my product key while I was typing it in. I don't think so. And you could format your drive if it's if you have something on the drive, you could just format it, or if you need a driver for it, you could do that. But we shouldn't have any problems with that. So let's just install it on drive 0. My computer will restart several times. Oh shit. Okay, so this is it. We're installing Windows. We're good to go. So boring. So boring. Oh, that was quick. No way. Well, anyway, here's the aftermath. Here's the mess. It's fucking disgusting. My whole room is a mess. Look at all that anti-static material right there. That free space cardboard. I can't believe I built my computer on cardboard. I've done it like 3 times now. I really should stop doing this. It makes, and the lighting in this room is terrible. It gives me way more problems than it does, you know. I'd rather just carry the fucking computer upstairs to go see if it posts, you know. I really played Russian roulette with this one. I put the whole computer together before I even bothered to post it. My motherboard could have been dead on arrival. That's another thing. Like, 1 out of 10 parts that you get is usually dead on arrival, and I've gone pretty long time without getting a dead on arrival part. So please unplug the following external drive and click OK to restart your computer. Oh, this external drive. I can't get it out. Oh my god. I wonder if you guys can hear that knock to a fan? Holy shit, that thing is loud. It's a PWM fan, but it's 3,000... Oh my god. Alright, anyway. It's a PWM fan, but it's 3,000 RPM, so once I get AI Suite going, I definitely am going to have to fix that. I'll be right back. I was so close to getting everything installed without having to use a fucking disk drive. But of course, you remember that motherboard disk? Driver disk that I told you to fucking just throw in the garbage? Yeah, well, about that. I need the network drivers from the motherboard disk to get to the internet. I could just download, you know, for the files off of this and put it on a USB from another computer, but it's easier just plug the fucking disk drive in. I'm so mad right now. Almost got away with it. Disk drives. Not quite obsolete yet, because I can't connect to the internet without the stupid network drivers.
Okay, now that we're up and running, I have pretty much everything I need for us to move on to some benchmarks and see if this all pays off. The before benchmarks will be first. So here we are running Firestrike Extreme by 3D Mark. This is one of the industry standard benchmarks that a lot of guys use to give you a good idea of what your completed system's graphical processing power is going to be like. So we're going to have the results posted here at the end, and we'll see how this holds up compared to the other benchmarks. So the first benchmark in our suite, Firestrike Extreme, like an idiot, the first time I ran it, I forgot to turn off fraps, so I only got 6,700. But once my brain started working, I turned everything off, and we got a score of 10,145. And here is a sloppily edited picture of all my recent scores in general, which I will have juxtaposed once we have the full before and after scores done. Second set of benchmarks I ran were Intel XTU and Firmark. XTU is a CPU benchmarking utility, and my score was 1,034 marks at a ratio of 4.5 gigahertz, and I got a temperature of 66 for max. Firmark, I got a score of 9,100 points and a max temperature of 78 Celsius. For XTU, it says my maximum processor frequency was 4.6 gigahertz, but the clock was supposed to be at 4.5, so I'm not sure why it went up to 4.6 for a second, but I don't see that being a problem when it comes to comparing the benchmarks. So the third and last benchmark in our suite is going to be Unigine Valley, where I got a score of 5,031 and 120 FPS. So now that we're done with the before benchmarks, we can officially move on to the after benchmarks. Once again, we're going to compare everything at the end, so don't worry if I go through this a little fast. For Firestrike Extreme, I got 11,098, which is almost an entire 1,000 points more than my original score. For Intel XTU, I actually determined that I needed a little bit more voltage, so it's not an identical overclock, and I also raised the CPU multiplier 100 MHz to 4.6 GHz, and it was only a tad bit hotter, and I scored 4 marks higher at 1,037 marks. As far as Firmark goes, we scored slightly less, but the temperature was 1 degree lower, and everything else was just about identical. As far as Valley goes, we got 122 FPS, which is 2 more, a score of 5,123, which is 100 more, and the minimum FPS was higher, the maximum FPS was higher, and my GPU actually turboed to a much higher speed than it did originally when I first ran Valley. This is very impressive because I did not touch the GPU overclock at all. I actually didn't overclock it. It was left at stock clocks for all these benchmarks. So GPU boost took over for me and turboed it to a much higher speed, I guess because of the increased airflow and better thermals. Okay, congratulations. If you made it this far, this is the part where we get to look at the raw results, so congratulations. And if you're just skipping to this part, well, fine, then congratulations to you too. So, if you're not in full screen already, I would advise doing that now because this is some pretty dense data. But first, let's take a look at Firestrike Extreme. I think this is the most interesting of all the results. There's not too much data to look at, but the score went up by 1,000 points. Now, Firestrike Extreme is not a forgiving benchmark. It renders in 1440p, and it just tears your system up. And we went up a whole 1,000 points after my rig was switched into the new case. I'm guessing that was due to the better thermal, capabilities of the case itself. There's better airflow, and the GPUs are probably getting more air in the orientation that they're designed to be in, facing down, not like they were in the half XB where they were facing, transverse, perpendicular to the ground. Next up is Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, which is admittedly not the most scientific of benchmarks because I didn't have the same settings on the before and after benchmark. But it's still very interesting data to look at because on the first benchmark, I had it on 4.5 gigahertz on all cores and 1.25 volts, and I got 1,034 marks. And I only hit a temperature of 66 Celsius. Now, Intel XTU is a very, very unforgiving benchmark. If you think Firestrike is bad, Intel XTU will sometimes, weed out insecurities and instabilities in your system that you would never see in even sometimes Prime 95, running for hours. But as soon as you hit that benchmark button on XTU, bang, your system will shut off. Not like the burn-in test, but the actual benchmark utility itself will weed out a lot of instability in a lot of systems. So, with that said, it also takes off a lot of points for thermals and voltage. I cannot believe that my score actually went up after adding 0.05 to the volts and going up 4 degrees at 4.6 gigahertz. By cranking your voltage up in XTU or getting higher temperatures, you are almost guaranteed to get a lower score almost every time. So I must have been doing something right here, or my CPU just must have performed better in the newer motherboard in general to get a higher score like that. Next up to bat, we have Firmark, which was actually the outlier in all of the data in that this is the only one that my scores actually went down a little bit. It's not a huge amount, so I'm going to say it's probably within the margin of error for, my very rough benchmarking and non-scientific methods here. But the score didn't go down much at all. It was, 100 points out of 9,000, and my average FPS went down by 1. And the GPU clocks were exactly the same, which is different than my other benchmarks as well, where after the build, my GPU turboed up to a higher speed in almost all the benchmarks and in real-world gaming in general. And last but certainly not least, we have Unigine Valley. Our score went from 5,000 to 5,100, which is like a 15% increase or something. Our average FPS went up by 2. Our minimum FPS went up by a significant amount, which I'm sure is probably a result of whatever is allowing the GPU to boost to a higher clock speed, which I would imagine is probably the increased airflow and, better temperatures. And that's the other thing that increased a lot, is the GPU clock speed went up by 100 megahertz. So whatever's going on in the new case and the new motherboard, the GPU is being allowed to boost up to much higher speeds, and our temperatures were a lot better as well. Our maximum temperature went down from 78 to 74, and the minimum temperature even went down to 65. So I'm very happy with these results in general. I worked really hard on putting these benchmarks together, and I'm speechless at how much of a difference it made. I really didn't think that having the same general hardware and just swapping out the motherboard and fresh install of Windows would make that much of a difference. And I think the most logical conclusion for us all to draw from this is that putting your PC into a new case and swapping out your motherboard, even though it's not going to make a huge difference in your actual frame rates in game or your render times in videos, it's going to give you a lot better temperatures, especially if it's a much better case and a much more traditionally designed case, and it's going to give you a lot more headroom for overclocking, which is the most important for me because I love to overclock. So once again, if you made it this far, congratulations, we're almost at the end, especially if you watched the whole video. And now we're going to switch to some nice pretty B-roll footage of the case, and I will give my closing thoughts and show off the finished product in general. I really am so happy with the outcome of this rig and the outcome of the video itself. I had a lot of fun doing this, and it's definitely been the biggest project that I've undertaken to date. There were over 100 clips that went into the production of this video, and it was a lot of work. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I certainly had no idea that it would be this much harder to do a video of building a computer than it would be to actually just build the computer itself. I've done probably about 3 or 4 builds to date, and they all went fairly quickly, and this was actually the quickest one as far as just build time goes. But the producing the video and the editing together and planning the whole thing took a lot of work. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, because I really did put my heart into it. And as for the computer as well, I really couldn't be happier in regards to how it came out. I really like the aesthetic and the look of it. Fractal Design does such a freaking good job making cases, man. I really gotta hand it to them. And the performance-wise, I can't believe how much of a difference it was before I even touched the overclock settings. I really am so excited to dig in and see how far I could push this rig to the limit. The GTX 980 is such a beast of an overclocker, and I'm really happy with my 4790K so far as well. I don't see myself needing to, switch rigs or build a new computer or even really upgrade this one for a long time coming. I'm very happy with the components I picked, and I plan on sticking with them for a long time. The only thing I really plan to do to this rig in the future is to add a custom water loop, and the Fractal Design Arc XL and the way that I plan this build is the perfect setup for that, because of the way that I was able to take the drive cages out and put my 2 hard drives up top in the 5.25 inch bays. So I'll have plenty of space for a reservoir, plenty of space for a pump, and I'll be able to make nice clean tubing runs. It's going to turn out really great, and I'm excited to do that. So really, thank you so much for joining me, guys, especially if you watched this all the way through to the end. It's been really fun, and please like and subscribe so you can see when I post new videos about gaming, PC building and hardware, a little bit of games journalism, and all kinds of fun stuff. I got a lot of really cool things planned for the next couple weeks, and I think you guys will enjoy it. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching my Ultimate Gaming PC 2015 whatever build vlog. This is Lysergic, guys, signing out.